In this video, we'll be looking at a problem based on ratio and proportion. In Central Park, the ratio of sunflowers to daffodils is 5:12. In Stanley Park, the ratio of sunflowers to daffodil is 3:8. I'm sorry, it's not so clear. So the ratio of sunflowers in Central Park to the daffodils in Stanley Park is 2:7. Which is greater, the number of daffodils in Central Park or Stanley Park? Okay. So we have two different parks and we have the ratio of sunflowers to daffodils. In Central Park, the ratio of sunflowers to daffodils is 5:12. In Stanley Park, the ratio of sunflowers to daffodils is 3:8. Now I'll be having sunflowers in Central Park as S1 and daffodils as D1, and over here S2 and D2. This is to avoid any confusion. So now what they're doing is they're giving us another ratio, and that is the comparison between sunflowers in Central Park to the daffodils in Stanley Park. Okay? So it is sunflowers in Central Park S1 to the daffodils in Stanley Park, and this ratio is 2:7. Okay, now we have the question wants you to find out which is greater, the number of daffodils in Central Park D1 or the number of daffodils in Stanley Park D2. Which is greater, D1 or D2? Now just by looking at these three ratios, we cannot determine which is greater, because it might seem in this ratio we know that daffodils is greater than sunflowers. Likewise in this ratio also we know that daffodils is greater than sunflowers. But to compare D1 and D2 is impossible, because even though this seems greater, 12 greater than 8 parts, this could be 50:120. There could be 50 sunflowers and 120 daffodils, and this could be 3000:8000. So just because this is 12 and this is 8, you cannot say that this is greater. It could also be with these numbers, because we know that ratio is just a proportion. This is just a proportion of sunflowers and daffodils. So we can't say which is greater just by looking at the ratios. So what do we do in such a problem? Like I've always said, take the two ratios with common factors and compare them and make them as equivalent ratios. Now looking at these two ratios, there are no common factors. Sunflowers of Central Park and daffodils of Central Park, sunflowers of Stanley Park and daffodils of Stanley Park. These two ratios cannot be compared. So let's take these two ratios. Here we have a common factor, and that is S1. So we'll be taking these two ratios and comparing them. So we have, let's compare these two ratios first. We have 5:12 and 2:7. What is the common factor here? S1. Here it's 5 and here it's 2. So the common denominator of 5 and 2 is 10. So let's multiply this ratio by 5 and this ratio by 2. So both sides by 2, we'll get S1 is to D1, 10 is to 24. Here we'll have 10 is to 35. Now this is how you equate two different ratios with a common factor. I've done more problems on this in previous videos. So if you're not familiar with this concept, check those videos out and come here. So we have S1, D1 and D2. Now we can join all three of this. Now it can be easily compared. We can write them all together as one ratio. We have 10 is to 24 is to 35. Now I have to compare D1 and D2. That is the number of daffodils in Central Park and Stanley Park. I have the number of daffodils in Central Park and the number of daffodils in Stanley Park. I have them in ratio. So we realize that it's unnecessary to compare these two ratios, because we already have D1 and D2 in this ratio itself, right? We have to compare D1 and D2 only. So we can confidently say that the number of daffodils in D2, that is Stanley Park, is greater than the number of daffodils in D1. Now what if the question asks, since it ended so easily, what if the question asks the total proportion, the total ratio of S1 is to S2 is to D1 is to D2? What do we do then? I'm improvising the question. Since we have found out the answer so easily, let's go a step further and let's find out the combined ratio of all the 4 different flowers. Okay, so let's look at the common factor here. What we want to find out is this: S1 is to S2 is to D1 is to D2. This is what we want to find out now. Okay, so we have found out this ratio. Let's compare these two ratios. The common factor is D2, right? A common denominator for both of this, a common multiple of 7 and 8 will be 56. So I'll have to multiply this by 8 and this by 7. So let's multiply this ratio by 8. We'll get S1 is to D2, 16 is to 56. And over here, get S2 is to D2, that is 21 is to 56. So I have S1 is to D2, S2 is to D2, and that is 16 is to 21 is to 56. Now I have two ratios, but do I have the combined ratio yet? No, because one factor is missing here and one factor is missing here. So now what I'll be doing is, look at these two ratios now. Forget about all of these ratios. These two are the improvised ratios. And check out any common factor. Any one of these common factors will do. Now it's easy for me to look at 10 and 16. How will I make them as equivalent ratios? 10 and 16, I can multiply this by 16 and this by 10. Right? A common factor of 10 and 16 is 160. So I could take 80, but I'll be taking 160 in this case. So a common factor will be 160. I'll be multiplying this by 16 and this by 10. I have 160 is to 384 is to 560. This is what happens if I multiply these two by 16. 160 is to 210 is to 560. Now you see, D2 is also coinciding. If I am taking common factor of, if there is more than one common factor, and if I am taking a particular common factor, then the other one also has to match, or else you have made a mistake somewhere. So D2 also matches, S1 also matches. So now I have come up with the overall ratio of S1 is to S2 is to D1 is to D2, and that is S1 is 160, S2 is 210, D1 is 384, and D2 is 560. So this will be the overall ratio. So what I've done is very easy. I have taken two ratios at a time, two ratios which have a common factor, and I've compared them. I've brought them into equivalent ratios, and likewise the other two ratios, I brought them into equivalent ratios. And to find the overall ratio, I've compared the newly improvised ratios to get one big ratio as this. If you want more questions of this type, please subscribe to my videos. I'll make more questions on the topic of ratio and proportion. Thank you.